So, who is Michel Djotodia? Well, he first tried to seize power in CAR in 2005, but his attempt to oust the then President François Bozizé failed. Djotodia went into exile in Benin, where in 2006 he was arrested. He was only released after promising to make peace with Bozizé. After rallying his former supporters and setting up the Seleka rebel group, Djotodia signed a peace deal in January last year and was appointed defense minister. But by March, he'd resigned. He launched a fresh coup, this time forcing Bozizé from office. Well, more than 2 million people, that's half of the population, have been forced from their homes because of the violence in CAR. At least 100,000 have set up a makeshift camp outside Bangi's airport. Paul Brennan has more.
More than 100,000 displaced people are now gathered in the camp outside Bangui airport, desperate for food. But that same desperation meant 2 previous attempts to distribute supplies had to be hastily curtailed for safety reasons. At the 3rd attempt, though, some food was distributed, assisted by the city's Catholic Archbishop.
The airport site is a complicated site. More than 100,000 people and no clear management. And the 2 times we tried to distribute aid, it was a failure. But we dared to try again.
There was enough for around 12,000 people, along with mosquito nets, blankets and soap, but it barely makes a dent in the overall problem here. Around 1 million people have been displaced since the predominantly Muslim rebel group Seleka seized power from the government last March. Seleka fighters are accused of looting, massacres and rape, and Christian militia responded with a vicious wave of reprisal attacks. Seleka's leader, Michel, Djotodia, was installed as interim president with the backing of neighbouring African countries, but he has been unable to end the cycle of violence, and international patience is now almost exhausted. On Thursday in Chad, Central African leaders will meet to discuss withdrawing their support for him. For obvious reasons, it's the vulnerable who are suffering worst. UNICEF and its partners have verified the killings of at least 16 children since a new outbreak of communal violence in Bangui on December the 5th. And thousands of children have been enlisted into the militias.
We've seen torture, we've seen attacks against children. They're recruited. We estimate that there's between 3,500 and 6,000 children who are with different armed forces. But also they're exposed to disease, they're out of school. It's really a very difficult place to be a child right now.
France has deployed a 1,600-strong peacekeeping force to its former colony, but hopes that peacekeeping efforts can be handed to an African Union force within 6 months. But analysts believe the AU force may simply be incapable of working unsupported. The UN says this is a country on the edge. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining me live from Washington, D.C. is J. Peter Pham, Director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. Peter Pham, so no confirmation yet that Michel Djotodia will step down. But do you think he will move aside, and why is he making this decision now, do you think?
Well, he really has lost whatever minimal base he had in the country. The Seleka movement, which the rebels who helped bring him to power, he subsequently fell out with them and dismissed them. That's what actually helped precipitate the beginning of the violence at the end of last year. So he no longer has their support. He never had the backing of the predominantly Christian majority from the southern part of the country. So now he has no constituency. He is actually an obstacle to any progress toward a new transition to a possibility even of reconciliation in this country. And so most likely he's packing his bags and this summit will be the end of him.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about the support of neighbouring African countries, particularly Chad? I mean, regional leaders, as you say, meet to discuss withdrawing support for the beleaguered president.
Yes, and Chad in particular is very important. President Idriss Déby of Chad not only was an ally of the deposed president, François Bozizé, but Chad is one of the few countries that's actually got something in this fight. It has put troops into the Central African Republic as part of the African force to try to restore order. So they certainly have influence not only as a neighbor, but also as a country that has put its own forces in harm's way in the middle of this chaos.
But the Central African Republic has had a long history of coup and counter-coup. So will his resignation resolve the long-standing political and religious issues that just won't go away?
Well, 2 points, Jordan. I agree completely with you. The country has had a very tragic history. This is a country where national identity was never consolidated. State institutions were never built. It's now had 6 heads of state since independence, and of those 6, 5 shot their way into power. So that's hardly a record to build upon. However, removing Michel Djotodia at least opens the way to something else, a transition of some sort. But they need a very serious process of national dialogue. To some of the religious leaders, both Christian and Muslim, have actually been making some very heroic efforts in this regard. Those need to be supported, but they do need a transition. The worry, however, that I have, and I think others have, is that the African force that's being talked about, 6,000 troops, in a country the size of France and Belgium put together, is wholly inadequate for the task at hand. And so the international community really has to decide whether it really is willing and capable of stepping in, or whether it's going to permit a country that's located strategically in the heart of Africa, bordering on a number of very difficult areas, South Sudan, Chad, and other places, to simply slide into chaos.
All right, Peter Pham, thanks for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.